I think people, when they think of the word, confident, they think of sure of yourself and a level of comfort or, a sense of, I got this, But those, like you said, those emotions can sometimes steer us the wrong way because we don't,
Here's the great paradox, Chris, and it's confidence is great. People will bring me in specifically to foster confidence in an individual athlete or for an entire team. It's just the way that confidence occurs is not how people think it occurs. And it's not me coming into a room, and throwing rose petals on the floor and giving everybody a high five. That's not confidence. That doesn't do anything except foster the wrong kind of expectations. We have, several generations of school kids who have been basically trained in that sort of setting. You're special. You're amazing. Your answer is just, it's relative to you. It's not because you don't know. So we have a lot. We basically acculturated a lot of soft kids who are now young adults, and it's not their fault. They were literally trained to only function with the big comfy pillow. And the way that you actually get confidence is by doing stuff. It's the old school method of teaching the kid to swim by throwing them in the pool. You learn very quickly that the water won't kill you, and that even if what you're doing doesn't look like really, good swimming body mechanics, you can get your head back out of the water and not die.
Right.
That's confidence building. Hey, look, I saved my own life in a scary, pool full of water. That's it. It's the willingness to pull the trigger. What throws us off, Chris, is the misconception that we have to feel confident to do well. Because you're not going to feel confident if what you're doing is important. If it's high stakes, you're naturally going to have anxiety. But instead of just, pulling the trigger and doing what you have to do, we have been sort of led to this erroneous belief that, whoa, put the brakes on. I can't go until I've got my comfy, confidence pillow.
Right.
I got to feel all warm and soft and squishy about this.
Right.
Nope.
And I would say...
You don't have to feel anything about it. You just have to go. And the more often you go, especially when you didn't feel like going, that's where confidence comes. Confidence is cumulative. Confidence comes from accomplishment. It cannot be, superimposed on a person. I cannot give you a T-shirt that says confidence on it and have that works. Right.
If you talk to any elite athlete, you have like the NBA finals going on right now, and I'm sure the players on both teams, there's so much anxiety and uncertainty and some fear and some of these other feelings that are probably at the forefront rather than that confidence that everyone just seems, that guy's so confident. Look at him, externally maybe he looks like he is, but in his head, he's just kind of that mental checklist of like, I'm sure he's just having to continually pump himself up to kind of say, you can do this, you got this, you can do this, and keep that doubt.
Or ratchet themselves down, but you alluded to something that's actually very important. When those guys take the court, how do they look? Like they're ready.
That's right.
Because if you can get the body to look ready, the body can sort of start to convince the mind, okay, this is what we do.
Yep.
This is work. This is the office. We know what we're doing here. Yeah, we're nervous. The stakes are very high, but we know what to do. Now it's just time to go.
Right.
For them, so much of it is about quieting all of the internal chatter, which there's sort of a spectrum to mental performance. as I work with either athletes or just regular people. And on the far end, on the most basic end, we have getting people, the old term is psyched up. And that's mostly with young athletes, and that's mostly a problem for kids who are involved in sports that they don't want to be in. The idea that you have to come in and get them amped up about something. If you're 10 years old and you're not amped up about baseball, you shouldn't be playing baseball.
Right, right.
How can you not be amped up about playing baseball? You're 10 years old. So if there's a problem there, that's a problem. Maybe it's watercolors for you. Maybe it's, something else. So that's kind of, at one end, it's trying to get people to connect emotionally with the activity so that there's some sort of intrinsic value associated with that experience. Then moving up from that is a little bit of what we're sort of talking about with the NBA example, which is learning how to bring things down. A real good example of that, again, from the world of gymnastics. Think about girls on a balance beam. It's 4 feet in the air. It's 4 inches across. Most people can't do backhand sprints. Okay, now do it on a balance beam, where failure could potentially paralyze them. Okay, there's a great opportunity for your mind to just run amok. And that's just in practice. Now think about that in a competitive context. Okay, I'm doing something that's physically difficult that when I do it, it has to look perfect because that's how they're scoring me. It could cripple me, and I also really, really want to win. That's a lot going on in somebody's head. So for athletes in those types of scenarios, it's really about getting the mind back under control. We don't need to amp those athletes up. We need to sort of do the opposite of that. We need to get all of the sort of the high amplitude emotions under control to the extent that we need to harness that force so that the energy can kind of carry us through, but it's not leading us in ways that we don't want to. And then beyond that point is specific problem solving. Okay, because there are certain things that people are afraid to do, or they're coming back from an injury, and they've got doubt. They're too protective of themselves physically, so they're not really kind of surrendering themselves in a physical sense to rebuild their skills that they had before they were injured. And then sort of at the top of that pyramid is just what I refer to as peak performance. When you are dealing with people who are so high level that the difference between them and the people they're competing against are just infinitesimal variables. It's so close. I'm currently working with a college wrestling team that is one of the most acclaimed in the history of the sport, just in terms of national titles and number of athletes that have gone on to world championships and the Olympics. And working with that team is a particular kind of challenge, because so much of what mental improvement strategies are all about, or sports psychology are all about, don't apply to these athletes. They've already gone way past that. They're not when you're one of the best in the world, you don't have confidence issues like maybe you did when you were competing for state, as a 10th grader. You've kind of transcended a lot developmentally. So the way that you address whatever it is that needs to be addressed has to change. But that's a very select group, within the population. Most of us are mortal. Most of us have the same types of obstacles, the same types of challenges that need to be solved. And that's where a structured program like Psychology of Strength comes in handy, because it's very common for me to go into a gymnasium full of athletes and I'll ask them, how important is the mental side of training in your sport? Is it at least 50%? Is it more than 50%? Of course, they're looking for the trick question. So they'll usually raise their hands when I get like, is it over 75%? A lot of hands will go up. I say, okay, if it's over 75%, that's well over half, right? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, okay, if it's that important, what are you doing about that right now on a regular basis to address it? Crickets. Most of the time, male athletes, female athletes, individual sports, team sports, even at levels where you can't imagine that's the case, when they're being honest, there's just not a lot happening there. And it's not because we don't believe that it's important. Most of the time, we just don't know where to start.
And in some cases, they just don't know how to even answer that, even though they've been living out some of those answers. Yeah, because they could probably tell you what discipline means to them, and things like that. So they have a grasp of a lot of the concepts. They just don't know how to even articulate it when they're like just asked, outright.
Yeah. Now that's a really good observation, Chris, because we'll go back to that wrestling example a moment ago. If you are an athlete on that particular team, maybe you weren't sitting down and going through a structured mental development program per se, but you were still a scholarship athlete at that university under those coaches, and you're practicing nearly year-round at a very high level. What you're doing mentally there is experiential. It's still valid. You're developing mental attributes, but it's sort of it's by happenstance. It's not the primary objective. It's an ancillary outcome, if that makes sense. So in those types of cases, what's good about that, because how many people that are critical bench customers are hard training guys and gals? Many, many of them. So they're doing a lot of the right things, but a lot of those things don't necessarily have structure to them. They're not part of a larger plan or a larger strategy. So when you have people who, train hard, or they're really tight on their nutrition, or they're training hard and competing at whatever it is they compete at, and at whatever intensity level they're competing at, they're doing a lot of the right things, but they're not sort of being primed to have those activities sort of in line with an overriding philosophy. Does that make sense?
It does. Makes perfect sense.
When we're talking about what the Psychology of Strength program is, it's really kind of taking a template and plugging in, there are very specific things that you aren't doing right now that you'll do with that material that will improve you. But some of the other things that you are doing now that maybe you don't really think of as mental training, you'll realize are actually part of that mental training process. And you'll make progress that much faster, because now everything you're doing is sort of in alignment with this overarching objective.
Right.
So now when you're going to the gym or you're going to the track, you're actually training your mind because you're understanding how all of that ties together.
Right. Absolutely.
Even though, slinging a barbell doesn't necessarily feel like mental training, there is a huge mental component to that.
Oh, no doubt about it. It's just like self-talk, or it's just. But where's your mental state when you're going to pick that dumbbell up? If you're saying to yourself, "There's no way I'm going to lift this up," or "My form is awful," or I'm such a wimp, you're probably not going to have a good lifting session right there. That begs the question, which was actually my next thing, was why are self-limiting beliefs so prevalent in our society, in our culture? Why are people so it's like the first thing that they go to is to kind of undercut themselves, pull the rug out from themselves.
Well, I'll offer a theory.
Okay.
And that theory really gets back to what we were talking about a short time ago, which is I think much of that is cultural. We are not, I think, across now there's always exceptions, and we're sort of, we're in this sort of club of critical bench customers that, we're not like everybody else. We're active and we feel confident in ourselves and, we seek challenges and on, and that's all awesome. But we also need to be able to engage effectively with all of the regular people in our midst. And I think the thing that we need to be aware of is that most people who have come of age, say in the last, 30, 35 years or so, are products of a culture where if things are hard, stop. If they're physically hard, you stop. If they are intellectually hard, you stop. We'll just create a lower tier reading group for you so you don't feel bad about yourself. Nobody's really pushed the way that I can remember being pushed. When I was a kid in school, you still had the potential, if you weren't doing well scholastically, you could flunk. You could be held back. I can't even think of a school district that does that now that I'm aware of. It would be so damaging to the student's self-esteem. Let me tell you something. There were kids I knew that were struggling, and the idea of flunking was very powerful. It was a motivator. They didn't want to be that kid. So if you take away, and granted, we don't need to make anyone feel bad just for the purpose of making, hey, we're going to make you feel bad so that you can build character. But a lot of the consequences that so many of us grew up with and took for granted seemingly don't exist, or they've been modified to the point where they're unrecognizable. So if it's impossible for me to fail, if I become one of those cliche kids that graduates high school and still doesn't know how to read, and there's plenty of them out there, I'm not well prepared for anything beyond that. I couldn't even, handle the rigors of high school. I wasn't even capable of that. So put me into a job situation, how effective am I going to be, as soon as there's a problem? Not effective. How are my coping skills in normal interpersonal relationships, those sorts of exchanges? Not good. I'm either going to shut down, or I'm going to freak out, or I'm going to have some manifestation of somebody who just can't cope well. I'm not going to make a good adult. I'm certainly not going to make a good, spouse or parent, or informed citizen. So I really think it's the result of, when little kids, Chris, when they go to the bowling alley and they inflate those long tubes that go in the gutter.
The bumpers.
So,
sure.
Yeah, okay. So, which is cute and it's fun, so a 4-year-old can't have a gutter bowl, okay? It becomes impossible to fail, right?
Right.
Well, I think that we have those tubes everywhere now. Metaphorically speaking, it's just impossible for us to get hurt. It's impossible for us to have any sort of negative consequence. And that, I believe, is the problem. You can't dare greatly if you've never dared greatly.
Yeah, right.
You can't come back from something if you've never experienced a setback.
Yeah, absolutely.
No coping skills. And no coping skills is, I think, one of the mass symptoms of our current culture. And the only way that we can address that is by trying to cultivate those attributes in ourselves and to spread that message.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it's like somebody who researches something so much and they know it so well inside and out. Something like, say, how to swing a baseball bat, and you've done everything and done all the research and spent hours upon hours, and you know all the theory behind it and everything else. But have you ever stood at home plate and took a pitch and tried to hit it? It doesn't matter until you actually put yourself in that situation to either succeed or fail. And yeah, it's I feel like I could write a book about that. You can't dare greatly until you've dared greatly, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the there have been so many amazing things that have been the product of sort of living in this technology age. But one of the things that I think technology does, I'll use just YouTube as an example. Go on YouTube, punch up how to do, I don't care what it is, whether it's, frost a cake, do a muscle up, change your oil. Somebody, probably a few hundred somebodies have put up a video on how to do stuff. And we've got, between YouTube and Google, we have access to all of this information. So theoretically, we know how to do, or we know about things, but we can't do things. We've never actually done it, getting back to your baseball swinging analogy.
Right.
So we've got this awareness of a lot of things, but we don't have, practical, boots on the ground. I've done it. I've experienced it. I've smelled it. I've tasted it. Whatever. And I think that too, our sort of relationship with knowledge is different. I'm of a particular era where if you had a grandpa, that grandpa knew how to do a lot of stuff. Like you couldn't believe how handy and clever people, from the greatest generation were. It's like there wasn't anything they couldn't figure out, because that's just how they had to be, because you had to do stuff in order to do stuff. And that type of knowledge is different than the sort of generalized awareness knowledge that is part of how many of us engage with the world now via technology. I can go online and watch, a philosophy lecture, from Harvard. Hey, that's really cool when you think about it. But we're really sort of swinging in that direction. We're sort of, sampling things and having short attention spans and just getting little bits of stuff, of a lot of things, as opposed to having like a deep level of familiarity. It's one of the reasons why I like watching shows about like craftsmen, people who, here's a guy, he's just a woodworker, and he's been doing it for years, and it's so simple and so pure and yet so deep. It's like watching somebody who does ballet at a really high level, somebody who's like a jazz musician or a classical musician, and you're hearing and seeing just years and years of work. They understand the intellectual aspect of, pitch relationships and, different harmonic traditions associated with different, periods of musical history. But the technical facility that one has to have, it's like watching martial arts. It's like watching somebody who can really paint. I don't think that we're creating those kinds of people as much as we used to, simply because we don't engage with the world in the same way, which is why I think it's so important for companies like Critical Bench to continue to make available information on how we can stay connected with our physical selves, because there has to be that type of engagement with ourselves. There's so many people who are very cerebral that are just physical wrecks. you're only half a person. You know what I mean? And if all you are is a physical stiff, but you're a moron, you're kind of half a person.
Right.
We need to avail ourselves to all of the information that is at our fingertips, because that's wonderful. That's a blessing. But we still need to be badasses. We still need to challenge ourselves physically, to whatever level we can, because we all, I'm not as smart as some people. I'm not as strong as some people. I'm going to be as smart as I can be. I'm going to be as strong as I can be, and because that's important.
And isn't it funny that oftentimes people are blown away when they see somebody that is a physical specimen, that is an elite athlete of some kind, but then they can also, they can speak about it in a way, and they can talk about their sport or their training or whatever it is in a very intelligent way. I mean, and come across as, wow, this guy's a heady. This guy must have a high IQ. This guy's really sharp. And he's a physical. I think people are kind of blown away. Wow, you can have both those things. People don't. I think, and there's a lot of those people out there. It's not the norm, for sure. But I'll hear or see somebody sometimes who can do something physically amazing, but then you can tell that they're an intellectual at the same time. And I think that those people were more common or commonplace. If you go back a certain number of years, I think, because you just had to be more physically active. It was just people walked more, people did more things physically.
Oh, absolutely.
And they were well read, and they had to do the reading and the writing and the speaking and all these things. And they were so, it was kind of the best of both worlds. And anymore, it's like you're one or the other. And there's just something huge missing.
Yeah. Some of the more compelling examples of cultures in history have been when the prevailing culture understood that you needed to be a physical person, an intellectual person, and also a teacher, a mentor. You had to be able to pass all of those things on. And I think some of the most interesting histories that we can read are of those cultures, because this isn't us just figuring this out. This has been known by enlightened souls for centuries. It's just that right now the world operates a particular kind of way that doesn't necessarily lead us logically back to the physical realm.
Yeah.
So for those of us who occupy that bandwidth, we need to be the standard bearers and the ambassadors of that.
Well, that's awesome, and that's why we have you as the strength psychology instructor, right? I think there's nobody that kind of combines the physical with the mental like you're able to do with your background, your experience.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a responsibility. It's a labor of love. It's a lot of that. It's just this is what I am most on fire about at this point in my life, and which was just also why I work with such a diverse array of end users. Adults and athletes, and even kid athletes.
Yeah. And we didn't even get into the passion. I mean, we could go on and on. We could probably talk for 3 hours about all the aspects and concepts in strength psychology, and passion being one of them. But you already alluded to it. The things that you're most passionate about are that's your thing in life. That's the thing that you should go with, and kind of becomes your cause, becomes your calling. It becomes your best thing.
Very much so.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure, Mike. I mean, like I said, I'd love to just have a candid conversation with you for hours and stuff, and break this call up into like 3 parts, right? But for obviously for the sake of time, and we want to save some of this amazing information for people in our strength psychology program, because there's so much in there that we didn't even get into. But thank you, Mr. Mike Gillette. like I said, always a pleasure, and I really look forward to people benefiting from the strength psychology program that we created. It's all about your personal story, your life. It's really all about you and your journey in life and where you are now, and it's just phenomenal stuff. So thanks again, and we will talk soon enough, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Have a good one, sir.